My name is Kirsty Livingston and I'm the Head of Membership Services and Strategic Partnerships, and I'm delighted to welcome you along today to our webinar session. It's a leadership webinar in conversation with Poonam Gupta OBE, who's founder of PG Paper, and also we'll be hearing from George Lindsay, who's the Chairman of IndiNature. So we're looking forward to today's session. I'm going to hand you over to my colleague Neil. Neil is our Deputy Chair for the Central Scotland IoD branch, and we're delighted that he's able to host today's session for us.
Kirsty, and thank you everyone for joining us on a rare sunny day in Scotland, and may it long continue for us here. So this is the third in our series on leadership webinars that we've been doing with the IoD, bringing you a series of truly inspirational leaders from around the worlds of business, sport, the army and beyond. And today we've got a fantastic pair of guests for you. So Poonam Gupta is the current EY Entrepreneur of the Year. So that's a rare accolade. I've had the benefit of being to their offices in Greenock, and actually she's got so many awards that their mantelpiece or cabinet isn't actually big enough to hold them all. So Poonam's got a truly inspirational story, and really looking forward to hearing more of that. And George is an international business leader who is also a global Scot, which is a very prestigious accolade for ambassadors in the business world around the world. So fantastic speakers. We've got a couple of themes today in particular we're focusing on. So obviously COVID is kind of all pervading for us. So overcoming adversity, dealing with the unexpected, but not just from a COVID perspective, we're looking to those as well. Looking at leading your team remotely, because that's a new challenge which we're all having to face. And then actually looking at the impacts we may feel that COVID will have on the international markets. So firstly, I'd like to turn to Poonam. And Poonam, you've got such an inspirational story. Do you want to start off and just tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to set up PG Paper?
Thanks, Neil. I don't know about inspirational, but I will certainly share my story with everyone. I am the CEO of PG Paper Company Limited. I moved to Scotland in 2002. I was born and brought up in Delhi. So I moved from Delhi to a very sunny west of Scotland. Like, look at it today. And to be fair, this summer has been absolutely fantastic. So I'm not complaining. I moved here, and I basically, I've kind of got a saying in my life that I'm the theme of my life. As soon as I came over here, I got the bad news that my mother wasn't doing very well. Within a week of coming here back in 2002, I ended up flying back to India and lost my mother. After a month, I came back to Scotland, and I wasn't in a very good place. And I realized that, I would have to go out of the house. I didn't know many people here. I was new to this country. And I started looking for a job just to deal with my own whatever personal issues that I had, having lost my mother so suddenly. So I started looking for a job, and actually one was not coming by. I was told almost constantly that I was either overqualified or I didn't have any experience in the UK, which I actually didn't have since I just moved here. So after deliberating a little bit, I changed my focus, and I thought, okay, what was I going to do? Was I just going to wait for somebody to offer me a job, or was I going to do something about it? Well, I've done my master's in international business and marketing. And, one of the things I remember our professor had taught us was that, you can actually create something and invite others to that party. And that's entrepreneurship. Create something. And I started basically playing with that idea. While I was kind of still coming up with various ideas, a million ideas every day, I decided to take up a voluntary position since I wasn't going to get a paid job, which was quite clear. And I got myself a job with the tax department in a local accountancy firm. I worked there for 2 months and learned a lot, working there. I learned some basics about setting a business in the UK, what VAT is, what, HMRC services are, a little bit about business gateway, Scottish enterprise, and the help you could potentially get there. And I started working on my business plan, and I got lucky. I got a £1,000 grant from Business Gateway at that time, which was offered to new startups. And at the time, everybody was talking about recycling. So while I was playing with all these ideas about what I could, obviously with my obvious connection with India, what could I get from India and sell here, or could I do that in reverse? This idea of recycling stuck because I kind of found it more exciting that there was something that I could get from here. When I say here, I'm in the Western world, UK, and perhaps sell it to India. It took me 10 months of hard work and research and a lot of self-learning, where I kind of, you can say, brushed up the details of how the accountancy was done here, everything. When I started in paper, I basically started from bare paper. So I had to learn all the different varieties of paper where, internet came in really handy. 10 months of hard work and research, I finally struck my first deal with a manufacturer in Italy. And then came the issue of how was I going to pay for the goods. Of course, my 10 months of research helped me create a customer base as well who were potentially going to buy from me. So when the Italians offered me some product, I already had a customer who was ready to get it from me. The problem became how was I going to pay for it? I mean, the goods I remember were around 24,000 euros or something. So then I had to think on my feet and came up with the idea of how I could finance that deal without going to banks or anybody. Because I had no credit history in the UK, there was no way anybody was going to give me any credit. Well, if I knew myself, then even I wouldn't give myself any credit at that time. But I did execute that deal successfully, and I managed to get the goods from Italy, sold them to India. And, I would say that was the turning point. I never really looked back. I started working with multiple companies in England, America, and the business just grew. Over these 17 years of my professional life, I did say earlier on that I have this common theme in my life that nothing happens easy. While my business was only 2 years old, I think this was about 2006, 2000, no, 2005, 2006, when I was expecting my first child, I realized that, motherhood is a big commitment itself. So at that time, I recruited my husband. I told him, I said, just, come and join the business. And he didn't trust me that, I could afford him. And I just told him to try me. He did. And 6 months on extensive training, he joined the business. And then we started growing the team little bit, step by step. 2006, I found myself wheelchair bound. I had, at the time, my older one was 1 year old. And then I got the news I was pregnant with my second child, and a disease that I supposedly had, which left me wheelchair bound, and I was told that I could die at any time. My daughter at that time gave me, that love I needed for life to survive, and my business gave me the focus. A year later, I kind of survived that. That's why I'm here in front of all of you. Got through with that illness, continued to grow my business. Other challenges, professional challenges came along the way. Some of them actually were that difficult that at one point I thought I might completely lose my business, and I didn't. So I can now look back and say that I'm very proud of the fact that I did manage to build. With every problem, I learned an important lesson, and maybe quite a few along the way. And every lesson taught me and made me and my business, I'd say, more resilient. Something that I also teach my team. It's a core intensive training part. When they come and join PG Paper, I started my business with very small budget. I did a lot of research, which I keep place even today very important focus on. And like I said, there's been so much to learn over last 17 years, which has helped me tremendously over this most difficult time that any business has faced, not just in one country, I'd say, but globally. With this coronavirus, this COVID that, we know it as an abbreviation, we saw, we are present in 60 countries, and international becomes resilient in itself because it's international. If one market is not performing well, you turn to another market. We have over 1,400 products that we sell. If one product doesn't do well, you turn to another product. But this time with COVID-19, subsequent markets were in lockdown simultaneously. So this was expected that, this was like the real test, I'd say, for PG Paper. Whatever we have done or, faced before kind of became almost like a peanut kind of problem in front of what we face today. This is the period that we dealt with, keeping in mind first and foremost the acceptance. Instead of getting panicky about the whole situation or worrying about everything else, we ensured that we kept our cash flow healthy, and that meant perhaps we slowed down a little bit, not take up a lot more risky deals, play a little bit by the book, play a little bit safer. When I say by the book, I meant safer. We also very quickly adapted, because we've spent so much money in our technology in last 3-4 years, trying to build these global offices. We needed to invest in technology, and that spend has come in so much handy with this COVID, because overnight almost, we managed to make our teams work from home. And not just that, the challenge we knew that would happen, obviously learning from our other global offices where most of our teams actually do work from home, that the productivity will suffer. So then, we ensured that we put as a company steps in place that even though our people were working from home and they were feeling secluded, that they still felt part of the dream. They realized the bigger goal that we were working for. We tried our best not to put undue pressure on them, with performance, especially with the sales team, because we knew that the markets are tough. We told them, take your time, spend your time researching right now. Perhaps that when we come out of this situation, you then go out and go for that revenue that we are going to lose out over this period of time. Tried to set out realistic goals for them, replanned our strategy. There were some acquisitions that were on the books, postponed them. So a lot has happened over last 3 months and continues to happen. Even today, we are still going through the phase where we are saying that we are coming out at the other end slowly but surely, as certain countries are starting to open up, markets are coming back, the demand's coming back, but it's nowhere near where it used to be. And again, I have tried over this period to keep the business and to keep the people calm, to say, don't worry about it. Let's just spend time relearning right now, like we always have done during a problem. Let's spend some more time, making our processes better, that when we come out of this situation, we then go after that revenue that we have lost. We've only furloughed 8 of our team out of around 50 global people that we've had. And we kind of, it was also something that we communicated with them very clearly, and we had their full support. So I'm proud to say that, as much as we have struggled a lot during these times, there have been some major lessons that we learned, and we continue to stay strong as a team together. And I have no doubt that once we come out of this COVID, that PG will grow, will be back on its growth path the way we had initially chalked out in our ultimate plans and goals that we have for the company. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you. So, no, look, that's a fascinating insight. One of our themes today is obviously overcoming adversity. So, you talked about quite early on in your business where you were wheelchair bound, had a second child on the way, so also already dealing with motherhood on the first, and told you might not survive. How do you actually deal with that? And you talked about, everything's made you stronger, but how do you feel when you get news like that, and how do you deal to be able to just carry on and progress?
Well, I think, like I said, my older child, my daughter was only 1 at that time, and I had lost my mother quite suddenly. So there was this will to give that she gave me, to say that, I didn't want her to grow up without her mother. Well, that was an ideal scenario, I guess, which I was hoping for. So that meant that, I wanted to give her everything that I had, my time, spend time with her. That kind of helped take away those worries of me not being well. Again, like I talked about acceptance. I think when I start with anything in life or anything comes, my first thing is I take my time to basically find that acceptance, that balance inside me, which is like, accept the situation the way it is. There is either something I can do about it, or there's nothing I can do about it. But in both cases, being panicky or, getting anxious about it doesn't actually serve in any productive way. So I guess I dealt with it. It just came. I didn't have a choice. I didn't have a choice. It was going to be what it was going to be. So I just accepted that if this is how it's going to be, I'm just going to play it to the best of my ability till the time, whatever time I had left. And that's the approach I took. My business was young. It was like, my business is my hobby. It's my baby as well. That kept me busy. So you can imagine being wheelchair bound, trying to run around, being wheelchair bound around a 1-year-old, and then trying to run a business from a sofa when you're we are pretty much kind of, not that mobile, and you can't do everything that you do as a normal person. There's not much that you can do. That's pretty hard enough. So there isn't really time to think about other things. I guess it kind of, in a good way, never really gave me time to feel sorry for myself. I just wanted to make the most of whatever I might have had left, looking back.
And you mentioned the word resilience before, so things like that must give you huge personal resilience, which you can then take on into your business world. So whilst we stay on the theme of adversity, how was it as a female entrepreneur dealing in papers being a male-dominated world, and particularly then over back to India, which is also quite a male-oriented business country? How did you take that resilience to help you overcome adversity you must have come across?
Well, I'll have to take you a little bit into my background there, my earlier life. I was born and brought up in India. I said that before, in Delhi. I came from a family where, women were not expected to work. Our job was not to go out and make money. The males or the men were the breadwinners. So, it was like, although I was quite good academically, and, I always had this thing about that I want to become something, I knew that, it would be an uphill battle. So I guess, part of that resilience I talk about came from there, where I was constantly told that, no matter how much you study, or however you want to do, whatever you want to do in life, you'll end up in somebody's kitchen being a housewife. And my thing was, no, I'm not going to be that person. I can be in a kitchen and cook for my children, but I wanted more from life. So that kind of, set me, you can say, from a very earlier on in childhood, maybe at, like, kind of set me out on a little bit on a battlefield with my own family and my own extended family, where I was constantly challenging the stereotypes, which I think must have contributed towards making me a stronger person. When I moved to Scotland, I came to know everybody works here. So I promise you one thing, I couldn't wait. I was like, okay, this is exactly what I wanted all my life. I'm going to get on this, professional ladder and get myself a job. Then that didn't happen. And then I thought, okay, then I have nothing else to do, nothing to lose. Let's start my business and see what I can make of it. So I think, if you kind of, I try to give you a summarized version of
Yeah.
my life, but very early on life as well. But that kind of sets out the tone of, when you're constantly challenging stereotypes, when you're constantly going a little bit against, what the society believes in, it kind of makes you a tougher person in its own way. And then the challenges I faced, lost my mother. I left her at the airport just a week ago, and then went back and didn't even get a chance to say goodbye. Left me devastated. Then, 2006, 2007, myself wheelchair bound, and so many professional challenges which came along the way. I guess I just took them in my stride. I was already used to a misogynist society. So even though sometimes in my meetings I would be ignored, as the main key person, simply because of being a woman, I would always patiently wait for my turn. I think something that I did learn earlier on in life, and kind of came in handy when I actually needed to apply it in a bigger scale, or on a bigger picture.
And look, as the father of two young daughters, I genuinely think your story is truly inspirational, because I love the fact your principle was, don't tell me I can't because I'm a woman, and I'll do it anyway. And you make your own way, and make your own destiny. I think that's a truly inspirational piece. So staying on the kind of adversity, but going into the business sense, what's been the biggest business challenge you've actually faced in your 17 years of PG Paper?
There have been a lot of challenges I have faced. The first one was, looking for those 24,000 euros when I didn't have a penny in my pocket. And, I really had to think fast, how was I going to raise that money? And I managed to convince my customer, believe it or not, to pay me upfront.
Okay.
And he did. And I paid for the goods. And then came my first challenge, was in 2005, the big one, where, India was my only market at that time. I was still very comfortable with India. I was working by myself, turning over £2 million. I had no other people except a part-time staff member who used to come and help me with some bookkeeping stuff. And something happened in India, complicated, but basically, nobody was suddenly buying, and I had over £1 million stuck in India in payments. because all these buyers, disappeared overnight. That was my first, I would say, real wake up call in business, saying that, this business, I just cannot depend upon one market. I need to start exploring other markets. And that was the start of, taking the company in a more to other countries, basically, because there was this realization that, if I want to grow the business, I cannot be dependent upon a single market. Then came a challenge in 2008 where something similar happened in Pakistan. But having learned my lessons from India, I moved on. The biggest challenge, I would say, has come during this COVID crisis. We had thousands of tons of cargo. If I put it in numbers, then which are easy to understand, maybe around 2,000 containers, containers filled with goods at various ports in the country. And some countries went into a complete lockdown where nothing was moving. We knew that there would be financial difficulties. The customers were not able to clear their cargo. Not just that, there was no cash flow in the market suddenly, in those markets also. So we knew that there will be problem with payments. And we realized that, if we didn't do something fast, if we waited, for a reaction for whatever, the government was doing, unfortunately, which is a lot, but it did happen a little bit later before the whole thing hit some of our other countries. We started credit insuring we actually came up with our own credit insurance for our long-standing customers, which we had to do. But then we realized that the cash flow is going to be tough. And we completely, looked at measures that we could take almost immediately to ensure that the bank balance stayed healthy. Although I've always had a very aggressive and risky approach towards business where, I'm not scared to take on a big deal. This is the first time ever where I actually told my team, do not take on any risky business, no matter how much a customer pushes you, because he doesn't know when his country is going to go in a lockdown. Because some countries went in a lockdown very late, and some of them actually never really went into a lockdown, but still the business would suffer. A view that not many of the markets and customers were taking. So you can say we kind of had to impose our own view on them and took that proactive approach that no matter how much you were demanding, we will only supply what we wanted to supply to ensure that all our other, things were in place and were in a position that we wanted to see them in. And I think that's what we did during this COVID, and we're still doing that actually during this COVID crisis, and that's how we've managed to come out of it. I would say, we've had damage, and I said there has been an acceptance that there would be damage, but we know that, maybe my timelines are next year, February and March, we'll start seeing healthier returns, and then we'll go after that business that we've lost during this time.
Yeah. And with your team, you've talked before about, obviously, you've got new difficulties of the team going remotely, and that doesn't suit everyone and has impacted productivity. So how have you kind of adapted to the fact that some people prefer it, some people don't, and what steps have you taken to kind of adapt to that and try and make the best for everyone?
So see, we as people, we're all different. One thing just cannot fit all. It just doesn't work. Now that there is a little bit advantage in the fact here for us that we are an SME. We have 50 employees, and that means we can still, to a certain point, kind of cater to every employee. Till today, look after almost every employer of ours. We have a clear structure in our team where every manager has, say, 4 or 5 people under them. They are in tune with what their team needs. So we realized, in the initial period, we tried to use the same tool, to make everybody effective. But then in a couple of weeks, it became clear that some people, although, with this scenario of working from home and with the systems I mentioned earlier on, the system we had invested in earlier 2-3 years ago, people are familiar with that. So, some of them were like they were flying, they were working so well from home. They have their dedicated desk, they were able to focus. But, few of them struggled, no matter how much we tried, they struggled. And we tried to bring them in, but we couldn't, the government advisory is such that we couldn't ask them to, come into the office. That wouldn't have been fair. So those were the people that we finally had to accept that perhaps they need a little break, because maybe they are dealing with a lot of issues. We do weekly meetings. In fact, just before this one, I was on the Zoom meeting with my team. We do daily calls to our people, We don't wait for them to reach to us. We go out to them and ask them how are they doing, how do they think. We have performance indicators, of course they help, but then we also reach out to them, not just for the work related stuff, but personally to, how do you think this is working out for you, mental well-being, all of that is important for us, for, which is, I place a great deal of importance on my team. They are highly skilled people, they're highly trained people, and it's important for me to keep them safe, not just from this corona, but also we've been talking about these mental illness issues. So we just, like I would say, excellent communication is important. Excellent, transparent communication is extremely important and has served us really well during these times. We've had complete support of our team. No matter what decisions we've taken, they've stood by us and they've realized that we have their best interests at heart. And it's important as a leader for me to have that trust that I have in my team has in me. And I guess I've done something right over the years to have deserved that trust from them.
I love that. I mean, communication is absolutely key, and the trust is earned. And I've talked about trust in some of the previous webinars. And as a leader, it comes from authenticity is one of the key things, and you're always very authentic, and that's what then allows people to trust you. I was actually on a panel discussion earlier today at the Scottish Business Leadership Conference about the challenges for workforce and remote working, and what you've done was kind of where we came to as the conclusion that it's not one size fits all anymore. So you have to adapt to the needs of the individual and understands that different people have different needs. And I love the fact you're taking the time for your managers to engage with the people and do the communication, because that's the key part for everyone here. And you also mentioned letting them know you care, because actually if people feel cared and looked after, that really helps them forward. I'd like to move forward and bring George at this point, and we'll come back to some questions with you later on. George, you with us and unmuted?
Yes, unmuted. Thank you. Listening intently.
No, so I heard some fascinating stories from Poonam. Just a wee snapshot of yourself, because obviously you've had a very varied career around the world as well. So do you want to just give us a whistle-stop tour of your background and what's kind of led you to where you are today?
Absolutely, yes. First of all, I'd like to say what an intriguing adventure your life has been so far, Poonam, and I'm sure that you have many more adventures ahead of you. But with what you've learned in the past and recently, I'm sure you're up and ready to go for it. So it was wonderfully interesting to listen to you. I'm from Glasgow, and I emigrated to Dundee about 2 years ago after returning from the United States. My daughter, for some reason, decided to move to Dundee, and my wife said, when we move back from the States, we're going to go and be close to our grandchildren, sorry. And so therefore, that was one of these yes, dear moments. And so I am now living in Dundee. My background is a little bit different to Poonam. After leaving Strathclyde, in the mid-70s, I have spent almost all of my time since then internationally, living in more than about 12 different countries, after living and paying the rent, going to the supermarket and sending the kids to school in 12 different countries. And I've visited over 100 and worked in as many. So I have a different set of background, but have I think accumulated over those years some interesting experiences. I actually worked in the recycling business straight after out of university. Almost, I went to work for Ireland Alloys in Blantyre, who are a high-value scrap company and a very well-known company. And I worked for them as their international buyers. I was buying recycled metal in the late 70s, Poonam, and it was a very interesting business to see how products at that point were also recycled. But my first, let's say, major career was when I left, and I went to work for Caterpillar. And I worked for Caterpillar in Geneva, and it's like being in the army, being with Caterpillar, any big conglomerate. I was moved around quite regularly. So I had, after Geneva, I had stints in the United States, and then I spent 3 years in Rome, responsible for Caterpillar representative for Italy, for Italy, Spain, Portugal, and the Iberian Peninsula and West Africa. And so I did a lot of traveling in West Africa. Following stint in Rome, I was moved to Kuwait, and I lived in Kuwait again in the early 80s, at the height of the Iraq-Iran war, before the first Gulf War. This is the Iraq-Iran war, so a long time ago. I moved to Dubai after that, and then had several different other postings with Caterpillar in the States and Geneva before I left to form my own company as my own management consulting company, which I kept on for about 7 years, based in Geneva. And then one of my clients tempted me to come and work for them in the United States, and I got into the software business there with a company that we eventually took public. And then I did a few other things moved back to France. My wife is French, and moved back to France and spent 7 or 8 years there doing various different businesses before being headhunted to go and to work in Saudi Arabia. And I worked in Dammam, Saudi Arabia for 10 years, living in Bahrain. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with the geography, but I crossed the big famous bridge between Bahrain and Saudi every day for 10 years with my passport to go to work. And I ran a very large packaging business there, where we had 4 manufacturing plants in Saudi and in Dubai, and ran that for 10 years before moving again back to the States as the chief operating officer of the software business. And now I'm back after 5 years in the States, back to Scotland. So this is my first time. I've been almost 2 years in Scotland. My first time really being working in the United Kingdom. So it's been an interesting circle I made to get back to where I started 30 plus years later. So that's a quick background of where I am. And currently I am my small consulting company. We advise several different businesses. I'm currently, as I said, the chairman of IndiNature, which is a company that makes insulation, thermal insulation, but using hemp as the raw material. So it's it's a circle. It's in part of the circular economy where we have zero waste. It takes less energy or less carbon to create the insulation than there is in the hemp. So it actually absorbs more carbon than it needs to transform it into thermal insulation. And I'm also an advisor with the University of Edinburgh in their Climate Kick program. So I advise young cohort companies in the University of Edinburgh in helping them grow their business. And so and that's really where I'm spending most of my time right now.
Oh, that's another fascinating history you've had there. So I'm really curious, because you've worked so long abroad, and as you say, only just kind of come back to work in the UK. Culturally and in the business world, how do you find the UK compares to the other areas of the world you've worked in? What does it get right and better, and what could it learn from the other countries and do more of?
Well, it's an interesting question. It's different for each country, of course. I mean, spending a lot of time, as I did in the Middle East, the cultural differences there are stark compared to what we have here in the United Kingdom. In the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, Kuwait, and I worked a lot in Jordan. So the whole of the Levant area too, is that there is much more of a and I think it's similar in India. I traveled to India many times on business, mainly trying to hire people to come and work for me in Dammam. But there is much more of a demarcation in these countries of who are leaders and who are workers, and there's a lot less. It's a totally different structure when you are the leader or the manager or in most parts of the Middle East. People just simply expect you to know what to do, and they expect you to tell them what to do. And that's simply not the same as they get frightened out of their wits if you ask them what to do, because they simply very often don't know how to answer. And so and I tried continuously to to involve, particularly in the company I was running in Saudi Arabia, where we had 700 people working in the plant.
Yeah.
And I had about 30% were Indian nationals, about 40% were Filipino nationals, and then the rest were a split between Sunni and Shia Muslims. And so the cultural difference between leading and managing those types of those types of cultural, each of these with their own specific culture, was quite different to what you would have here when I'm working with some of these smaller companies in the United Kingdom, which are totally immersed in transparency and becoming involved in every decision and being much more part of how would you like to solve this problem. So it has been an interesting difference. Working for about 10 years in the States, also, the United States was I guess, the epitome of professional work ethic, where everybody has the right to say something as long as they contribute positively, but still quite a strong them and us culture I found in the larger companies in the United States. So each country has got its own challenges.
That's fascinating. As you know, I do quite a lot of work on helping companies develop a culture of high performance, and this is all UK based, and we very much focus on empowerment and trusting people to get on with it, give them the framework to succeed, and then they can, everyone adds value. But what you're saying is actually that just wouldn't work in countries like Saudi because people just want to be told. So I guess that's a positive. Is that fair?
I don't know if they want just to be told. I don't think that they've had the opportunity to say what they want to say. And so, for example, when in manufacturing companies I had, we set up Kanban systems, which were unheard of. We would get teams together in the factory to see how we could improve a particular issue that was happening. So we would get everyone from on the assembly line right through to the supervisors and through to the managers to come together and try and solve a problem and collectively. And it was quite interesting to sit in at the beginning. It became much better to sit at the beginning when you would have, again, some young guys that were basically assembly line workers being sitting in a factory, and the manager would be saying, well, we have a problem here, how would you fix it? And the guys they'd never been asked that before. They just simply were being asked. They're expected just to sit there and someone to tell them how to fix it. So I don't know if anyone else has that type of experience in other countries, but we worked very hard to get them to understand that it was okay for them to say what they thought, because very often they felt if they said the wrong thing or said something that was different to what their immediate supervisor might have said, they would be, they would not want to having to lose face. And so it was a more challenging time, but I don't think it was because they didn't want to be told what to do. I think historically they had not been asked, but they did enjoy it once we opened up to them and said it's okay to be part of the team.
And let's skip forward. Obviously, COVID we know is one of the biggest challenges any of us will face in business. Poonam talked the same about hers. So for IndiNature, you've been working with. What have you guys been up to in COVID? How's it impacted you? How much have you been able to carry on with your business as planned, and what changes you had to make?
Well, it's a small business based out of the ECCI over in Edinburgh. I don't know if anyone knows, up at the schoolyards up in the University of Edinburgh. And as I said, they manufacture, or they're in the planning to manufacture thermal insulation. As a small company, we are pre-manufactured. So there's a company who's in the process of building a factory, ordering some very large, multi-million-dollar pound capital equipment, and in the process of funding that and raising funds. So when the world turned upside down in February, March, April, then we had to work very hard to maintain the focus that we had to ensure that the long-term viability of the company was still there. The product that they're planning to build and the product that they will sell is a very compelling and disruptive product. They were in the final throes of negotiating their seed funding when the world fell apart in March. What we did was we made sure that we, as a small team on the board, and the chief executive and the chief operating officer, who are also on the board, we ensured that we created an environment where the prospective investors were very aware, and we've had a high level of transparency of the different scenarios that could possibly happen depending on when this COVID issue would disappear. And taking those various risk factors, and we did a lot of risk analysis and a lot of management reviews. We had probably one board meeting every week for about 6 weeks, where we actually asked the executives to go back and give us an example of what another scenario would look like, until we became comfortable that the scenarios we're looking at, the cash flow plans we're looking at, were going to enable us to be successful throughout what we expected to be the height of the COVID issues. And then we were very, we articulated that, I think, particularly well to the investors, some of whom decided to keep their hands in their pockets because they just didn't know what was going to happen. But I think by showing the scenarios that we had developed, and by showing the investors that we do feel that there's a high probability that this will work, we actually were able to maintain the investment round, and the company actually closed on its first seed investment about 4 weeks ago at the height of the COVID issue. And we are now in the process of negotiating the second CapEx investment round, which is much larger. That's several £million, and that's going very positively. And again, what we did was that we were even better than we were. We were still pretty good, but we were even better at being as transparent as we could with the potential investors in terms of explaining to them why we were doing what we were doing. And I think that has been successful.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And that brings us back into kind of dealing with uncertainty, which is one of our themes. And what we've talked about there is what the approaches we always take is say, focus on what you do know first. So if there's lots you don't know, let's focus on what you do, deal with the controllables, and then do scenario planning, and then make decisions based on that, but be prepared to adapt and adjust. And Poonam, if I can bring you back in now, because you touched on some of the same as well when you talked about the adversity, and you said actually first thing you do is acceptance and don't worry about the things you can't control. But just like in that kind of dealing with uncertainty space, what other approaches do you take to manage your business through?
Well, I think you kind of summed it up earlier, and that when you're dealing with adversity, actually in any business, one of the very important facts which becomes a major factor in your success is troubleshooting. Mm-hmm. And when you're dealing with adversity, what are you doing? Actually, you are troubleshooting. Now, you keep aside the factors that you can't control. There's nothing I can do about COVID-19. There's nothing I can do about forcing my people to come into work when actually that's not allowed. And I actually don't even want to do that because, like I said before, it's my first and foremost priority is their safety. And so what is that I could deal with? I started looking at things that needed my attention and prioritize them. And then, kind of start taking them in my whatever daily diaries. This is what's needing done. A major part of that, which is keeping that dynamic approach. Now, over the 17 years of the journey of PG Paper and myself and my other businesses, we've always laid focus also on the fact, dynamism. You need to be able to change and adapt to a changing environment very, very quickly. I mentioned 2005 when something happened in India. Then I mentioned 2008 when something happened in Pakistan. Actually, in November, something major happened for us in India. But this ability to kind of assess the situation, see what needs to be done, and rather than thinking about what is the, I look at the worst case scenario and start working towards the best case scenario. And that might mean that we need to replan, we need to change a few things. Sometimes it also requires, changing people's approach, but there's always something to learn, and that learning needs to pass on. So when we deal with that again, then we know, what, and the people know what they are dealing with and how they have to deal with it. And I think that's the kind of approach I take towards any problem. First of all, define that problem. What is it? and then define the solution and then focus on the solution rather than focusing on the problem itself.
I'm just going to repeat that because I think that was brilliant. So, define the problem, define the solution, then focus on the solution as the right way forward. And even just the other bits you talk about of dynamic and adaptable, I think are really important leadership traits, and troubleshooting as well. One of the big American generals talked about one of the roles as a leader is problem solving. And the day people stop bringing their problems to you is the day you've stopped being a leader, because actually that's part of your role. And one of the pieces you said right early on was about keeping your people calm. So I think it's really important in times of crisis as a leader that we are there to make decisions and we take the brunt of the pain. So if that means we're taking decisions which we worry about, we do that. But by creating a direction for our people, we allow them to remain calm and move forward. So I want to touch on some of the questions we've had from our guests, and please put more questions in here as well. So firstly, going back to your setting up PG Paper, a question here from Ray Black around how do you feel about taking on the global giants in the world of paper with your business? What was your take on that?
I have always taken that approach that I am my only competition, and I take that same approach with my business. I want to be better than what I was yesterday, and I want my business to be better than what it was yesterday. We are competing with multi-billion-dollar companies, in our segment. But we've carved our own niche, but we still continue to grow within our own niche to the point that actually these billion-dollar companies now come to us to go to certain markets. So they want to form. Over the years, we've formed partnerships with some of them where we are working with them also, not just the manufacturers, to take their product into various markets, because we've always taken that approach towards market where, we try to understand the culture, we try to understand how the people in that market work, and then, we kind of define a structure that works in that particular market, something that, we've been told over the years that we do really well. So this competition in some way is also, you can say, our business partners, in one way. Yeah. So I think the competitions never worried me. I keep an eye on it. I want to know what's happening, and it's important that you know where the market is leading, what your competition is doing. But we've always carved our own focus and our own plan and our own way of doing things, and we'll continue to do that.
Thank you. And we're going to move into a few questions around the international space, because obviously both of you are a huge experience in international markets. So the first is any recommendations on how best to handle cultural diversity across the international markets? So George, maybe if I turn to you on that one first.
I think that cultural diversity is handled well by trying to hire and train and employ the people in those markets that are from those markets to a great extent, because they understand the culture, and if you understand the people who travel there and live there who are not from the various countries can learn, can understand, can appreciate, but it's very difficult to be totally ingrained into the local culture, either from a business or personal perspective. But they should surround themselves with really strong people who are from whichever cultural environment that you're in, to ensure that you can benefit from that strength. You can bring in the expertise in other areas of business that you might want to adopt in various markets. But I would certainly encourage any companies thinking of going international, find some good people there.
And you obviously talked about in your Saudi business, you had so many different cultures even within there. Now diversity, we firmly believe is the right way forward. So how were you able to harness that to actually create better solutions by tapping into the different cultures and different expertise that they brought?
Oh, we did lots of different things. First of all, we did simple things with so many different. You understand that 70% of the people that worked in the businesses I ran were actually what were called single status employees, who were actually from distant, far away from their own families, but they are without their families and living in large company-owned properties, nice big apartments. And so I tried very hard to ensure that the cultural diversity was, that culturally they were comfortable together when they were not working. And we did lots of different things in the factory. There was absolutely no difference in the factory as to who did what job. So from a professional, from an operating perspective, there was no, well, we'll have some Filipino technician do this because there's other Filipinos, or we'll have some Indian. That never never became an issue. The only one issue we did have in Saudi Arabia, of course, was the Muslim issue, where we had Sunni and Shia Muslims, and they pray at different times. They have different. We had 5 mosques in our factory, something that you have to work around, and they pray at different times, and we had different, slightly different times, a couple of minutes apart. And so we adapted and we adopted, and we made sure that everybody felt comfortable, so that there was no understanding that the Shia were being less or better treated than the Sunni Muslims, for example. So it was a daily challenge working with making sure that the highly culturally diverse employment we had caused no issues, and we very rarely had any issues at all. I think because we treated everyone. And I knew, for 10 years, I was the CEO of the company. And for 10 years, every single day, I walked around the entire factory every single day and shook hands with every single person I met. And I made sure that if there was any issues, they came to see me about it. So perhaps that helped.
That's a very similar thing we heard from Poonam earlier, that actually it's about understanding that everyone's individual and being flexible and adaptable to actually cater for individual needs. So I think that's a great lesson for us. So Poonam, the question we started there was around recommendations on how best to handle cultural diversity across international markets. Is there anything else you'd add to that?
I think George has actually kind of touched on everything that we do as well. We have a back office in India, and like I mentioned, we have office in 5 different countries. The most interesting piece for us to fit together was, which we've learned beside our customer markets, which are 60 different markets, we always start by understanding the culture, then making sure that, that's translated to people, that, some people do not take offense to something. So for example, I find mostly in Arabic culture, it can be quite direct. And, if you have a female sales representative, then if somebody is like kind of somebody, a British, born and brought up by that. So these were like, I just gave you a small example. So I mean, we ensure that the people understand how somebody is different, and what they might mean is not the way they should be taking it as. When I work in Japan and I work in America, the 2 cultures are completely different. Japanese can be really polite, not very direct, whereas Americans are what you see is what you get. So I guess, like a lot of my team works around different countries as well, and over time, but whenever they kind of are put on a certain region, they're given all that information, and if they are struggling with something, they are given support. Also, a very good point made by George is, hire people in that country. Now we try that very hard, and sometimes it's not easy unless you have somebody on the ground there, but we have successfully done that in Sweden, Turkey, in China. We have all local people working for us there. But a very interesting piece of the jigsaw was when we were trying to fit our UK logistics team and the Indian logistics team together. It took us months to get it right, because I could understand as an Indian and a person who's lived there what was going on. But what helped us was, we then started making sure that people, instead of texting, emailing, and messaging, spoke to each other more. And that helped, because a text can be so easily misread because of the mood you're sitting in. And then we also ensured that the teams met each other, which is like, every 6 months somebody would travel from my team to meet the Indian team, or somebody would travel from Indian team here, and that kind of solidified the team. Not to say that we don't have problems today, we do, but we kind of everybody knows how to deal with them, and they're easier than they used to be in the beginning.
And that comes perfectly back to communication again, right? So actually the importance of communication, making sure that lands, which actually is another difficulty we have with COVID and not being in the office, because actually if we're now defaulting to text or email or those kind of channels, there's a greater risk of misunderstanding in there. So it's another piece just to think around the right way to communicate between our teams, but for our managers, to our staff, and around the place. So I've got 2 very quick fire questions left, and then I'll quickly hand back to Kirsty. So it's a 20-second answer on each of these for you. So the first one is from Ray Black, which was, if work ethic were a measure, as a very rough estimate, where would the UK/Scotland rank against the other countries you've done work with? So I guess we're looking here as kind of
I'd say in top 10.
Top 10%. Okay.
Yes.
George, for you?
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. I would say that the UK, Scotland in particular, that I worked in, has got a wonderfully refreshing work ethic compared to most of the countries I've worked and visited. That is a lot more, I would say, professional than in many other countries.
Perfect, thank you. And my final question. So this is, leadership's always evolving. So in your periods of time, so I think Poonam, you said you've been running PG Paper 17 years, and George, I think you quoted 37 years. You've been touring the world as a leader. What's been the single biggest change to leadership in that period of time for each of you?
I'll let George answer that first. You've given me a question I need to think about now.
George?
Well, I don't, to be very honest, I don't believe that leadership changes all that very much. The tenets of principles of leadership simply don't change. I think leaders are people who drive the vision of making things better, but then they act on it. And I think no matter what business you're in and what environment you're in, I think the difference between a leader or someone who might be a boss is that they act, that they talk about it and then they do something. And I think that's the great, I don't think that changes. I think great leaders are always people that have actually executed on what they do.
Say something like that. I love that. Thank you. And Poonam?
For me, leadership's always been about leading by example.
Okay.
So, if I create a set of ethics that my team can see I adopt, in my own life, then they take me as a role model and they want to make themselves better and they want to work for the company in a better way. I think that for me it's again something that's not going to change, but I think there is an importance of to be visible to your team, to be there for them, and to lead by example. That's very important. That's pretty much the principle I live by.
I think that's a perfect way for us to finish. So lead by example. So just big thank you to both Poonam and George for fascinating insights from your experience. So I really want to say a big thank you to that. I'm sure everyone's got a huge amount out of it. I got loads personally. And Kirsty, I'll just hand back to you to close up.
Yep. Thank you so much, Neil. Thank you so much, Poonam and George. Really fantastic session. I really enjoyed it myself. So thank you again. Just a quick shout out. We have another webinar running tomorrow. We have Mary Sporage from the Fraser of Allender Institute joining us tomorrow, and she's going to give us some tidbits from the latest research report on the impact on the Scottish economy from the current crisis. So hopefully you can join us for that. Thank you so much for coming today, for your great questions and your ongoing support. Really appreciate it. And thanks again. Have a nice afternoon. Bye.
Thank you, Poonam. Thank you, George. That was great.